I knew something was wrong when my own son met me at the shop door with his arms crossed. This was the same door I'd walked through for 43 years. The same threshold I'd carried him across when he was 6 years old and wanted to see where Daddy worked. Now he stood there blocking it like I was a stranger trying to sell him something he didn't need. "Dad, we need to talk." His voice had that corporate smoothness he'd developed since marrying Jessica. All edges filed down, all warmth sanded away. I was holding my thermos, the old dented one with the duct tape around the handle. I'd been bringing that same thermos to work since before he was born. The parking lot smelled like oil and exhaust, familiar as my own skin. "What's going on?" I asked. He glanced back toward the office, where I could see Jessica through the glass, typing on her laptop. She didn't look up. She never looked up when I was around. "Look," he started. And I already knew. The way he couldn't meet my eyes, the way he shifted his weight. This is hard to say, but Jessica and I have been talking. The business is evolving. We're bringing in new management, new systems, and frankly, your methods are outdated. My methods. The methods I'd spent 4 decades perfecting. The diagnostic techniques I'd developed myself. The custom tools I'd designed in this very shop. The reputation that made people drive 50 miles because they trusted Callahan's auto to do it right. "You're firing me," I said. "Not a question. We're restructuring." He tried to soften it, but the blade was already in. "You'll still get the pension we agreed on. But day-to-day operations, that's going to be handled by younger staff. People who understand modern systems. I built this place," I said quietly, "and I'm grateful." He said it like he was reading from a script Jessica had written. "But it's mine now, Dad. Legally. You signed it over 3 years ago, remember?" I remembered. He'd convinced me it was for tax purposes, for succession planning. Told me nothing would change, that we'd run it together for years. That was before Jessica, before the MBA she pushed him to get, before she started calling my work old-fashioned in that polite voice that made every word an insult. "You're really doing this," I said. "It's just business. Nothing personal." I looked past him at the garage bays. Bay 3 was where I'd taught him to change his first tire. Bay 1 was where we'd stayed up all night fixing Mrs. Patterson's Buick before her daughter's wedding. Every square foot of this place held a memory he was pretending not to see. "Fine," I said. "I'll clean out my toolbox." Already done. We had everything moved to storage this morning. He actually looked relieved, like he'd been worried I'd make a scene. "Your personal items are in boxes by the dumpster." By the dumpster. 43 years in cardboard boxes next to the trash. I didn't argue. Men my age learn that dignity sometimes means walking away without letting them see you bleed. I picked up my boxes, 2 trips to the truck, and drove home in silence. My wife Sarah died 6 years ago. Cancer took her slow and mean, and toward the end, she made me promise I wouldn't let grief hollow me out. She'd loved that shop almost as much as I did. Used to bring lunch and sit in the office, doing paperwork, making sure I actually ate instead of working straight through. After she passed, the shop became the only thing keeping me upright. Now even that was gone. The house felt too quiet that afternoon. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the boxes. Pictures of me and the crew over the years. My custom timing light, the engraved wrench the guys had given me for my 25th anniversary, and underneath it all, my old leather notebook. I'd started keeping that notebook in 1981. Every problem I'd solved, every innovation I'd developed, documented in careful detail. The timing calibration method that cut diagnostic time in half. The custom valve adjustment technique that worked on engines everyone else said were too far gone. Trade secrets I'd planned to hand down to my son the way my father had handed down his carpentry knowledge to me. I flipped through the pages slowly. 40 years of knowledge, hard-earned and carefully recorded. And then I remembered something that made my chest tighten. 3 months ago, I'd caught Marcus, one of the new mechanics, photographing pages from this notebook. When I'd asked him about it, he'd stammered something about wanting to learn. I'd been flattered, even helped him understand some of the more complex procedures. Now I wondered who'd really sent him looking. I pulled out my phone and called Tommy Chen, my oldest friend and the best patent attorney in the state. We'd grown up together. Stayed close through marriages and kids and Sarah's funeral. Tommy, I need to ask you something, I said when he answered. If I developed proprietary methods for automotive repair and someone started using them commercially without permission, is that actionable? There was a pause. Jim, what's going on? I told him. All of it. The firing, the boxes by the dumpster, the notebook, my suspicions. Do you have documentation? He asked. Of the methods, dates of development, proof they're using them? Every detail, I said, looking at 40 years of meticulous notes. Signed, dated, witnessed. And did your son sign anything when you transferred the business? A whole stack of papers. Why? Because if those methods were developed before the transfer and weren't explicitly included in the transfer agreement, they're still your intellectual property. Tommy's voice shifted into attorney mode. And if he's using them commercially, that's infringement. I sat with that for a long moment. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, hitting Sarah's favorite coffee mug on the shelf. She'd always said the universe has a way of balancing the scales if you're patient enough to let it. What would I need to do? I asked. Come to my office tomorrow morning, Tommy said. Bring everything. I spent that evening going through every document from the business transfer. Tommy was right. The sale agreement covered assets, client lists, the property, equipment. Nowhere did it mention the proprietary methods, the trade secrets, the specialized knowledge that actually made Callahan's auto worth buying in the first place. My son had taken the kingdom but forgotten that his father still held the keys. The next morning, I drove to Tommy's office in the city. His secretary remembered me from Sarah's memorial, gave me a kind smile and fresh coffee. Tommy met me in the conference room, reading glasses perched on his nose. This is more extensive than I thought, he said after an hour of reviewing my documentation. Jim, you've essentially created a proprietary diagnostic system. If your son is using this without license, we have a strong case. I don't want to destroy him, I said. He's still my son. Tommy looked at me over his glasses. Then what do you want? I thought about that. About Jessica's dismissive glances. About being escorted out of my own shop. About 43 years reduced to boxes by a dumpster. I want him to understand what he took for granted, I said. I want him to see that I wasn't just some old man in his way. Tommy nodded slowly. We can start with a cease and desist. Require him to stop using your methods immediately. Without those techniques, his operation is going to struggle. He'll figure out pretty quickly what he lost. How long would that take? I can have it drafted and delivered by tomorrow afternoon. I drove home thinking about my grandson Michael. He was 10 now, sharp as his grandfather, always asking questions about how things worked. Last time I'd seen him, he'd been upset that I didn't come to the shop anymore. His parents had told him I was retired. I wondered what else they'd told him. The cease and desist arrived at the shop on Wednesday at 2 p.m. I knew the exact time because Tommy texted me. I didn't go anywhere near the place. I stayed home, worked in my garden, tried not to imagine the explosion I knew was coming. My phone rang at 4:17 p.m. My son's number. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 4:45, then 5:20, then 3 more times before I finally turned the phone off and made myself dinner. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, the healthy stuff Sarah always tried to get me to eat more of. I was eating for myself now, finally taking care of the body I'd punished with fast food and long hours for too many years. The next morning, there was a car in my driveway when I came back from my walk. My son's BMW, parked crooked like he'd been in a hurry. He was sitting on my front steps, still in his work clothes from yesterday by the look of it. Dad! He stood up as I approached. We need to talk. I unlocked the door without responding. He followed me inside. What is this? He pulled the legal document from his jacket, wrinkled like he'd been clutching it all night. You're suing me? I poured myself coffee, took my time adding cream. I'm not suing you. I'm protecting my intellectual property. This is insane. Those are just shop procedures. Everyone does stuff like that. No, I said, turning to face him. Everyone doesn't. I developed those methods over 40 years. I have documentation, witnesses, dates, and you've been using them commercially without permission. You're my father. I learned them from you, and I gave them to you freely, as my son. But when you turned this into just business, when you fired me from my own shop, you changed the terms. Now it is just business. And business requires proper licensing. His face was red now, that vein in his forehead pulsing the way it used to when he was a teenager and didn't get his way. You can't do this. Half my services depend on those diagnostic methods. Then you should have thought about that before you put my belongings by the dumpster. He stared at me, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to fall asleep in the office while I finished late jobs. Then, Jessica's influence slid back over his features like a mask. How much? He asked. What's it going to cost to license them? I hadn't thought about that. Honestly, I hadn't thought past wanting him to understand what he'd thrown away. I'll have my attorney send you a proposal, I said. After he left, I called Tommy. He was delighted by the licensing angle. We spent 2 hours working out terms that were fair but firm, enough to make my son feel the weight of what he'd taken for granted, not enough to actually destroy the business. But something else was gnawing at me. The way my son had looked, desperate and cornered. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike, spending hours running alongside him until he found his balance. When had I stopped being the person he came to for help? The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I knew my son was scrambling, probably trying to find workarounds, maybe consulting his own lawyers. I focused on other things. Started designing a custom carburetor I'd been thinking about for years. Visited my sister for the first time in months. Took my grandson to a baseball game. Michael asked me about the shop during the 7th inning. Grandpa, when are you coming back to work? I don't work there anymore, buddy. But why? You built that place. Dad always says you taught him everything. I looked at this kid. This perfect combination of my son's features and Sarah's gentle spirit. Sometimes people forget where they came from, I said. Sometimes they need to be reminded. He was quiet for a minute, watching the game. Then, I miss you being there. It was more fun when you were around. That hit me harder than anything my son had said. On Friday afternoon, Tommy called. Jim, we've got a problem. What kind of problem? Your son filed a countersuit. Claims you abandoned the business, that your methods are common knowledge in the industry, and that you're engaging in bad faith litigation. I sat down heavily. Can he do that? He can try. It's weak, but it'll drag things out. And honestly, it's going to get expensive and ugly if this goes to court. I thought about that. About lawyers and depositions and family dirty laundry spread across legal documents. About Michael caught in the middle. What if, I said slowly, there was another way? Tommy listened as I explained what I was thinking. It was risky, and it required something I wasn't sure I had anymore. Trust. That Sunday, I invited my son to the house. Told him to come alone. He arrived exactly on time. Another thing Jessica had taught him. She'd made him punctual and successful and distant. Sit, I said, gesturing to the kitchen table. He sat, wary. Look, Dad, my lawyers say. I held up my hand. I don't want to hear what your lawyers say. I want to hear what you say. He blinked, caught off guard. Tell me, I continued, why you really kicked me out. And don't give me that evolution speech, Jessica wrote. His jaw tightened. She didn't write anything. Son, I've known you for 34 years. I know when you're using someone else's words. He looked away, out the window at Sarah's rose bushes, now overgrown without her constant care. She said I'd never be taken seriously as long as people saw me as Jim Callahan's son, he finally admitted. Said I needed to step out of your shadow, prove I could run things my way. And firing me proved that? In her mind, it showed decisive leadership. He said it like he was trying to convince himself. Did it occur to you? I asked quietly. That you were already out of my shadow? That I'd spent 30 years teaching you everything I knew, specifically so you'd surpass me? He looked up, startled. I was proud of you, I continued. Every innovation you made, every new technique you learned. I bragged about you to everyone. Told them my son was smarter than I ever was, but somewhere along the way, You started believing that being better than me meant erasing me. Dad, I held up my hand again. Your turn to listen. I'm not trying to destroy your business, but I need you to understand something. Those methods you've been using? I developed most of them after your mother died. Working kept me alive when grief tried to pull me under. Every page in that notebook represents a night I couldn't sleep, a problem I solved to keep my mind from breaking. You didn't just take my work. You took the thing that saved my life. His face crumpled in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. Oh God, Dad. I never thought. I know, I said. That's the problem. You stopped thinking about who I was, beyond an obstacle to your success. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked. Life continued in all its ordinary ways. What do you want? He asked finally, voice raw. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared. Inside was a new proposal, different from the licensing agreement Tommy had drafted. I want you to succeed, I said. But I want you to succeed honestly, knowing where your foundation came from. These methods, I'll license them to you for $1. In exchange, you bring me back to the shop, not as an employee, as a consultant. 2 days a week. I'll train your team properly, make sure the knowledge gets passed down right. He read through the document, and I watched emotions play across his face. Surprise, relief, shame. Why would you do this? He asked. After everything? Because you're my son, I said simply. And because your mother would never forgive me if I let pride destroy what she helped me build. His hands were shaking as he signed the agreement. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. I'm sorry, he whispered, for all of it. Jessica, she made it seem like you were holding me back. She loves you, I said, but she doesn't understand what we built together. Maybe she will, given time. Or maybe she won't. But that's between you two to figure out. He nodded, then hesitated. Michael misses you. He asks about you constantly. That made me smile. First real smile in weeks. Tell him Grandpa will be back at the shop on Monday. After my son left, I sat at the table for a long time, holding the signed agreement. It wasn't perfect. There would still be tension, still be adjustments. Jessica wouldn't be happy about this, but it was a start. Tommy called that evening. I heard it worked out, he said. You're a better man than me, Jim. I would have made him suffer longer. Life's too short, I said. Sarah taught me that. She was a wise woman. That she was. Monday morning felt different. I packed my thermos, the same dented one with the duct tape, and drove to the shop. My son was waiting at the door, but this time he stepped aside, held it open. Welcome back, Dad. I walked through that familiar threshold, smelled the oil and exhaust, heard the pneumatic tools singing their mechanical symphony. The crew looked up, surprised. Old Martinez broke into a grin. Boss is back, he called out, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been loose for weeks. My son cleared his throat. Everyone, he announced. This is Jim Callahan, our new consulting master mechanic. He'll be here Mondays and Thursdays, training the team on advanced diagnostic procedures. A couple of the younger guys exchanged glances. One of them raised his hand. Are you the one who developed the Callahan calibration method? Guilty, I said, and they actually looked impressed. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. The shop didn't just survive the transition, it thrived. The young mechanics were hungry to learn, asking questions I'd forgotten anyone cared about. My son started consulting me on business decisions, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Jessica remained cool, professional, but even she couldn't deny that profits were up 15% since I'd returned. Numbers speak their own language, and she understood that one perfectly. Michael started coming to the shop after school on my days. I'd set him up with basic tools, let him help with simple jobs, watched him develop the same focused intensity his father once had, the same curiosity that had driven me my whole life. One Thursday afternoon, 3 months after everything had changed, I was showing 2 of the younger mechanics a technique for diagnosing transmission issues when my son appeared in the bay. Dad, can I talk to you a minute? We walked to the office. He closed the door, which he rarely did. I want to add something to our agreement, he said. I waited. Wary. He pulled out a document. I want to make you a partner again. 20% equity. Not because I have to, because it's right. I looked at the papers, then at my son. He met my eyes steadily. No corporate smoothness. No Jessica-coached words. Just my boy. Finally grown up enough to know what he'd almost lost. Your mother would be proud of you, I said. I'm trying to be someone she would have been proud of, he replied. Took me too long to figure out what that meant. We shook hands. Father and son, business partners, two men who'd found their way back to each other through the language we both spoke fluently. The honest work of hands and tools and problems solved together. That evening, I sat in my truck for a moment before driving home, looking at the shop in the fading light. The sign still read, Callahan's Auto, but now it meant something different. Not just a business, but a legacy passed down properly, with respect and understanding. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Grandpa, can you teach me about carburetors next week? I smiled, typing back. Absolutely. I'll bring my notebook. The notebook that almost destroyed us. The notebook that ultimately brought us back together. 40 years of knowledge that now had a future again. Hands to pass into, minds hungry to learn. I drove home as the sun set, my thermos empty, my heart full. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we have to teach the people we love most. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, if you love them enough, they finally learn.